In this Blender tutorial, I'm going to show you how to get started with sculpting in Blender. So if you've never sculpted in Blender before, or maybe you've sculpted a little bit, but you kind of need to know kind of the basic things to get started, I'm going to show you all the basic stuff and all the tools that I use to do sculpting in Blender. Now you can see above me, I have this camera right here that you can see on the screen. And I have this here because I wanted to show you my setup, because I think the setup is really important to being able to sculpt efficiently and sculpt well. And it's also important like where your keyboard is, because you're going to be using your keyboard for shortcut keys. Now I first wanted to talk about what tools you're going to use for sculpting. So I would highly recommend you not use a mouse, because computer mice really aren't made for sculpting. They're really just made for, moving around and clicking on buttons on the screen. And when you're doing sculpting, you have to make a lot of strokes, and a computer mouse just isn't really good for that. It's just really not what it's made for. Also, a mouse doesn't have pen pressure, so you're not able to use that. And also, when you're using a mouse, you're not able to have a very good posture for sculpting. But again, if you're just starting out with sculpting, you could do a little bit of sculpting with a mouse just to see what you think of it. If you can use a screen drawing tablet or a pad tablet, I'd highly suggest that you do that. So right here you can see I have this small Wacom pad tablet, and really this is going to be 100 times better than using a mouse. Now I like to use this screen tablet because I really like actually drawing on the screen, and it's a lot bigger. As you can see, it's got a lot more space. But these are definitely more expensive than these pad tablets. So if you only have one of these, or if you can only afford one of these, then you can totally do that. And this is going to be way better than using a mouse. Before I was able to afford this big Huion drawing tablet, I was using this Wacom tablet for probably like 2 years. And I don't feel like it prohibited me to sculpt good. Definitely using a screen tablet is funner and maybe a bit easier, but a pad tablet isn't going to stop you from making good artwork. I definitely can recommend this. It's very high quality. There will be Amazon links in the video description to this tablet if you want to get this exact one. And a disclaimer, they are affiliate links, but it won't cost you anything extra if you purchase something through those links. And if you're wondering what screen tablet I have, this is the Huion Canvas GT191. And after looking around online, it looks like this tablet is actually out of production. At least I can't really find anywhere that you can buy it unless you wanted to like buy a used one. But there is another version of this tablet that Huion has made. And that tablet seems to look really similar, and it seems to be a newer model. I think this model was a little bit older, so I don't think it's in production anymore. So there will be a link to the Huion Canvas 20 if you want to check that out. I'm guessing that the Huion Canvas 20 is going to be really similar. After looking at it, it seems like it has a lot of the same features, but it's a newer model. Also, I forgot to mention that I bought this drawing tablet glove. This will sometimes come with drawing tablets, but sometimes it won't. And I really like it because it makes it a lot smoother when I'm moving my hand on the drawing tablet. Alright, so now that we've talked about tablets, let's actually jump into Blender and start doing some sculpting. So I'm going to start off by deleting everything. Delete the cube, lamp, and camera, and the crosshair got out of place, so I'll just press Shift-C to hop it back to the center. I'm going to press Shift-A, and I am going to add, under Mesh, I'm going to add an icosphere. You can add any object that you want, but I'm going to add an icosphere just because I think it would be a good thing to start sculpting out with. If you click on the Add Icosphere settings right here, you can change this value. Change it up slowly, because if you change it up really quickly and make it a really high number, Blender's probably going to crash because there'll be too many vertices. So just bring it up slowly. I'm just going to go with 7, and that's not too high for me. Okay, and now that I have this nice, smooth, round sphere, I'm going to go over and click on this Sculpting tab. And here we are in the Sculpting layout. So you can see that there are a bunch of brushes right over here. There's also Sculpt mode, Edit mode, and Object mode. If you're in the layout, you can also just go over to Sculpt mode right here. But I like going over to the Sculpting tab so that the workspace is already set up. You can see that there's some settings right here like radius and strength and some other settings, and we're going to go over the most important ones that I use. And then also over here you can see there's other settings. These settings are actually the same as here. You can see there's the radius and the strength and the radius and strength. So all these settings up here are also going to be on this side panel right here. So I'm first going to go over all the different brushes that I use. I'm not going to go over every single brush because there are a lot of brushes, but you can definitely play around with all these different brushes. So if you click right here, you can click and drag out. If you pull it out once, then it'll just have 2 rows of brushes. This is how I like it because I don't really use very many of the brushes down here. I mostly use the brushes up here. And if you pull it out even more, you can see it then has the names of the brushes. I just bump the microphone. So it has the names of the brushes if you pull it out even more, but I already know the names of the brushes, so I don't really need this. Let me just show you really quick how to navigate in the 3D scene when you're using your drawing tablet. Now, it's really going to depend on what you've programmed these buttons to do, but most pens should have a front and back button. And if you go into your driver settings on your computer, you should be able to program these, but I just have these buttons set at the default. So if I click with the front button and move around, this is actually going to rotate the view. Now you can't really see it rotating because we're in the very center, but if I just draw something, now you can see we're rotating around the object. Also, if you want to just click and drag on this little circle right here, you can rotate around. You can see right there. I don't really like to use this because I like to use shortcut keys to work faster. So to remove these things, because I don't use them, you can just click on that button and that'll remove those little widgets right there. Okay, so now we know how to move around. To zoom in, you hold down Control and click with your front mouse button. So I can just hold down Control and click, and that'll go in and out. So I can zoom in and zoom out. And if you hold down Shift and then click on your middle mouse button and hold it down, you can pan. And you can see down here, there's the shortcut keys if you want to see what I'm doing. Also, if you want to change the center of your view to a certain area, you can hold down Alt and then middle click on an area, and that'll move you around to that area. Also, if you want to jump to a spot where you've just recently sculpted, like if I sculpted right here and then I want to zoom into that, you can press the period key on the number pad. It's kind of far away over here, but you can click on the period key and it's going to jump you over to that. And then if I sculpt down here and then press the period key again, it's going to hop me over there. And then of course you can also use the Alt key and click with your button and it'll move you around. I actually don't use the Alt key very much because I want to keep my right hand on the Shift and Control key so that I can very quickly use Shift to pan, Control to zoom in and out, and then just let go if I want to rotate around. And that brings me to the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is how to set this all up. So I am left-handed, if you haven't figured that out yet, but I believe most people in the world are right-handed. And so if you're right-handed, you're probably going to be sculpting better with your right hand. And if you're going to do that, you're probably going to want your keyboard to use the Control and Shift key on the other side so that you can sculpt with your right hand and then use the shortcut keys with your left hand. So really just play around with your setup and try to get it so that it works well for you. I've also got down muscle memory, so I don't even really think about the Shift and Control keys. It might take you a little while to get used to this, moving around, but now it's just muscle memory and I don't even think about the Shift and Control keys. And if you look down here at the screencast keys, you can see that I'm very quickly going Shift and then Control and Shift and Control just to move around wherever I want. And I have full control and I'm not really even thinking about it. So when you're starting out with sculpting, it might be a bit hard and clunky, but once you get that muscle memory, once you practice enough, it's going to be really easy to navigate, just like if you were navigating in the 3D view in Blender. Okay, let's go over the brushes now. So you can see here, this is the draw brush. So if I just click and drag, you can see it's basically just kind of making a little lump. This brush works really well. And you can see that this brush is making the digital clay come out. But if you want to make the digital clay go in, you can hold down the Control key while you're sculpting, and you can see that it's going to now carve in instead of out. And also if you want to change that right here, you can see the direction. There's add and subtract. So if I change it to subtract, it'll now go in. If I change it to add, it'll go out. Now, as I said earlier, I'm only going to go over the brushes that I mostly use. You can definitely check out all of them, but I'm going to go to the next one, which I mostly use, which is the clay strips. And this is the brush that I use the most. So this one basically just adds layers of clay on to your mesh, and it works the same way. So if you hold down Control, you can see it'll now sculpt in. Now there is something that I like to change to this brush, and that is turning on this auto smooth. I just personally like it because I find that the clay strips brush isn't very smooth. Now I wouldn't suggest turning this up very high, maybe just turn it up to like 0.1 or 0.2, but you can see if I turn up this auto smooth, now when I sculpt, it's just going to be smoothing out the mesh while you're sculpting. So you can see here is how it looks with auto smooth turned off. And then if you turn auto smooth to maybe like 0.1, you can see it's definitely a lot smoother. And the different strips of clay that you're adding are blending together a lot nicer. So you could definitely turn that on if that's something that you want to do. The next brush that I use is this inflate brush. So this basically just kind of adds a blob, sort of inflates it. The next brush that I use is similar. It's called the blob brush, and it just basically adds a blob. I don't use this very much, but I use it a little bit sometimes. And the next brush is the crease brush. So this brush I really like. I use it a lot. This basically adds a crease to wherever you sculpt. So you can see if I sculpt here, you can see it starts to add that crease in there. And then if I hold down Control, I can do the opposite, which is going to make like a peak right there. And the next brush is this scrapes brush. So basically what this does is it kind of like takes the clay and kind of like flattens it sort of. It kind of like scrapes off a layer of clay and flattens it. So you can see here, it kind of makes different angles. So if I'm like trying to make angles of like a face, like if I'm trying to make the side plane of like the cheek or something, or the angles of the forehead, I can use this to kind of get the planes of the face or just get the right shape of your object. You can see it kind of like flattens it out and scrapes off clay. So I really like this one. So the next one is this grab brush. So this one you can just grab and drag, just click down on a part of the mesh and drag it, and it's going to pull the mesh around. So if I was like sculpting a face, maybe this is a head, I can just grab this and pull out a jaw and maybe like pull this back a little bit and maybe pull this down a bit. And then another brush that I like to use a lot is this snake hook. And what this brush does is basically what the image shows. It just basically pulls out the mesh and it kind of looks like a snake. And then the last one that I use is this pose brush. So this one is really good for like if you're making a character and you want to like move the limbs around, you can click on an area and rotate it and it's going to pose your mesh. So it doesn't work very well for like places like this. It's pretty weird and doesn't work very well, but it works good for like limbs, like maybe an arm or a leg of a character. And the last brush that I use a lot is the smooth brush. So you can see it's right up here. I actually skipped over it when I was going down, but the smooth brush basically just smooths out any spot of the mesh. Okay, now let's go over the shortcut keys for these different brushes. So the grab brush is G. So if you press the G key, you can see that now I'm on the grab brush. So the smooth brush, you can press Shift S and that'll jump over to the smooth brush. You can see right there. But I actually don't really use that. I don't press Shift S and then go to the smooth brush. What I do is, let's say that I'm maybe sculpting, like maybe I'm sculpting right here and I'm adding some clay right here. Then if I want to smooth out the mesh, what you do is you hold down Shift and then just drag around and sculpt. It actually uses the smooth brush. So it's not using the draw brush. You can see it's just smoothing out the mesh. Then when I let go of the Shift key and draw, now it's using the draw brush again. And then if I hold down Shift, it's going to go back to the smooth brush. And if you want to get to the draw brush, the shortcut key is X. You can see right here, if I just hover over, you can see the shortcut right here. There's Shift spacebar, but then there's also the X key. I use shortcut keys for like the grab brush and the smooth brush, but the other brushes, I just find it really easy to just move up and then click on whatever brush I want to use. So it's really your preference whether you want to just go over and click on one of the brushes or use the shortcut key. Alright, now you can see here that there's this radius and strength. And you can see they're also over right here, radius and strength. So the radius changes the size of the brush. So if I make this bigger, you can see now it's a really big brush. Also the strength, if I change the strength up, it's going to be a lot stronger. You can see it's coming out a lot more. And also I'm pressing Control Z to undo my action. Shift Control Z will redo an action and Control Z will undo an action. That's pretty standard with most programs. Now there are shortcut keys for the radius and strength. If you press F, it's going to change the radius. So you can see I can just press F, move this up and make it bigger, or F again, make it smaller. And so you can very quickly just use the F key to change that. And then if you want to change the strength, you can press Shift F. So if I press Shift F, now you can see there's this, it kind of gets black and then it kind of gets more transparent. The darker it is, the stronger it's going to be. You can see here now it's 1, and then it's like 0.7, 0.6, 0.5. And if you make it a lot smaller, it's going to be not very strong at all. Now I wanted to go over what's called matte caps, because you can see that this kind of white look is maybe a little bit boring and it might be kind of hard to see the form of your sculpt. So if I go up here and click on this drop down menu, you can see that there's different matte caps. And I've actually imported more matte caps. If you want to add your own matte caps or create your own, there are tutorials on YouTube. You can check that out on how to like make your own matte caps or import your own matte caps. So you're probably not going to see all of these because I've added in my own, but you can just like click on a matte cap, like maybe this red one. So why matte caps are so important is because they show you the form of the mesh. Because if I move around here, you can see there's like different reflections and stuff. And you can also use these studio. So if you want to use these different studio ones, you can. Now you may have noticed that while I've been sculpting, it's mirroring it to the other side of the object. And that's because the symmetry feature is turned on. So the symmetry settings are right up here. And if you also go down, they're also right here. And you can see right here, there's this X turned on. If I turn this off, now when I sculpt, it's not going to mirror the object. So if you're doing something like a face sculpt, then you're definitely going to want to turn symmetry on because the face is going to be pretty similar on either side. But if you're doing something else, then you might want to turn symmetry off. So this one right here is the main one, mirror X. That's the main one that you're going to use. You could also use Y and Z if you want. And it's turned on default because I think most people are going to be sculpting like a character or a face. But you can turn it off really easily just right there. Now I wanted to show you what these two buttons do. So this one right here, you can see it looks like a little pen with like some lines around it. If you have this turned on, which it is turned on default, what this does is it uses the pen pressure sensitivity in your pen to change the size of the brush, because this is the radius, so it's the size. So you can see right here, if I sculpt very lightly, I'm not pressing very hard, it is a pretty small width. And then if I push down really hard, you can see now it's really big. Now, if you want to turn this off, you can just press the button and now it'll be turned off, and it's not going to use the pressure sensitivity to change the size of the brush. And then that's the same for this right here. So that's the strength. So the strength is like how hard it's going to be. So if I just press down pretty lightly, it's not going to go up very much. But if I press down really hard, it's going to be coming out a lot more. And then what this button does right here, it looks like some paint brushes. What this does is it makes the size of the brush, or the strength, the same between all the brushes. So right now the radius is turned on. So if I just press F, make this a little bigger, maybe I sculpt a bit, and then I go to another brush, you can see that now it's the same. It's 82 pixels. If I go to another one, you can see this one's 82 pixels as well. If I go to this one, 82 pixels, they're all the same. So you may or may not want to use this, it really depends. If I turn this off, you can see that now the radius is only 35 pixels because that's the default. Then if I go over to a different brush, like the clay strips brush, and scale it up, you can see now it's a lot bigger. Maybe that's too big, and I can just sculpt in there. And then maybe I go to the draw brush, and there it is at 129. And then I can go back to the clay strips, and that's 114. So if you want each brush to be a different size, then just leave this off, and every time you go into the different brush, you can change the size. But if you want each brush to stay the same, so if I make a brush this big, I want all the other brushes to stay that same size, you can turn it on, and now you can see, maybe I'll change this to like 100, and turn it on. Now each time I go to each brush, it's gonna stay at 100 pixels. Now there is one other brush that I wanted to show you, and that is the mask brush. So I don't use this brush very much, but sometimes I use it. So let's say this is not a very good face, but let's just say I'm making a face and I want to extrude out the character's neck. What I can do is I can use this mask brush and I can mask around the spot that I want the character's neck to come out of. So I can just mask it in, and now if I try to sculpt on it, you can see that wherever the mask is, you're not going to be able to sculpt on it. So how I'm going to extrude out the neck is I'm going to press Control I, and Control I will invert the mask. So now you can see everything's affected except that little area. So now I can press G and go to the grab brush, press F and make it way bigger, and then pull it out, and you can see I can't move anything else. I can only move the area that's not affected. So I can just pull out the neck right there. And then when I want to get rid of the mask brush, I can press Alt M. So Alt M is going to get rid of the mask. And now you can see I can now just continue to sculpt the entire thing. Now you also may have noticed that while I've been sculpting, this mesh is starting to get a little bit low detail. So I'm going to pull out the nose here with the grab brush, and you can see here that as we're starting to pull this out, we have less and less mesh to work with. So we need more detail to sculpt. So there's two ways to add more detail, and they're both down right here. There's the Dyn Topo and the remesh. First, I'll show you the remesh, then I'll show you the Dyn Topo. I actually like using Dyn Topo better, but there are cases where I sometimes use the remesh. So let me just open up this remesh tab, and you can see here's the voxel size. That's how detailed you want it to be. So then I can click on remesh. You can also press Ctrl R, that's the shortcut for remeshing. And if I do that, you can see it now remeshed our object. And it made it even less detailed because it's only 0.1. So that's actually really small detail. We want it to be a lot bigger because we can't really sculpt with this. There's just not enough detail. So if I change this to like 0.05 and then click on remesh, you can see it's even more detailed. I want it to be even more detailed. So maybe I'll change it to 0.01, remesh that. Make sure you're not going to make it too high though, because if you make it too high, your computer could crash or Blender could crash. So you can see here, that's a lot better. And now we have a lot more detail to work with. And you can see it kind of looks like it has a weird texture to it. That's because we were really low detail and then we went higher. So you're just going to need to like smooth that out and kind of sculpt it to fix that. But normally you're not going to have that issue very much. And now I'm going to actually like give this character like bunny ears just to show you what I mean. Okay, so I've added these kind of like bunny ear things. And you can see here that if I zoom in, you can see the mesh is starting to get low detail again because, yeah, it's starting to get pulled out and we need more geometry. So if I just hit remesh again, you can see once it's finished, it looks a little bit weird, but if I just click on Shift and smooth that out, now this is all smoothed out and now we have a lot more detail to work with. So I can use like the clay strips brush, hold down Control, and make the inside of the bunny ears just like that, and now it has a lot more detail. Because if I was going to do that before, let me just Control Z that until we're back to the lower mesh. Here we are. If I try to sculpt in here, you can see it's been stretched out and pulled so much that I can't really sculpt inside the bunny's ear. But then if I remesh this, it gives it lots more detail and I can just smooth that out and then press Control and then go in. So basically with this workflow, you're continuing to sculpt and then hitting remesh, and continuing to sculpt and then hitting remesh. So this is cool, but I like to use the other one, which is Dyn Topo. So if I just turn this on, it might give you a little message. You can just click on OK. I like to use Dyn Topo better because what this does is it adds geometry while you're sculpting. So I like it better because it's like more creative and you don't really have to worry about the like technical side of sculpting, or technical side of digital sculpting, I guess. So I like to use something maybe like 3 or 5 with the detail size. And now if I just start to sculpt here, you can see if I zoom in, it's going to keep on adding detail. So this is actually a little bit laggier. It's not quite as smooth because it's adding detail while you're sculpting. So if I make the brush really big, kind of zoom out, you can see that's the detail size. And then if I zoom in and sculpt, you can see now that's way more detail. You can see the difference from here to here. And then definitely play around with this. Like if you want to make this 10, you can see now it's going to be less detail. If you make this like 2, it's going to be really high detail. If you make it something really high, it'll start to get laggy like that. Now you can see it's kind of lagging. And it caught up, but it was a little bit laggy. And then also you can see there's this smooth shading. If you turn this on, then while you're sculpting, it's going to keep the shading really smooth. Let me just change this up to 5 again. You can see now when I'm sculpting, it has smooth shading and you can't see those vertices. I actually like to turn this off just because I like to see the vertices and just kind of see how the mesh is going. But you could definitely turn the smooth shading on if you prefer that. Now there's one more setting I wanted to go over within this Dyn Topo. You can see right here, the detailing. Right now it's set to relative detail. But I can change it to constant detail. And if I change it to constant detail, I'm going to need to change this up, like maybe to 60 or something like that. Now, when I'm sculpting, you can see there it is. And when I zoom in, it's going to be the same amount of detail. And this is really useful for certain things. I prefer to use the relative detail most of the time, so that when you're zooming in, if you want to like make one part of your sculpt more detailed, it'll just automatically make it more detailed. So it's really up to you which ones you want to use. Okay, so let's just say that I finished this bunny human character. This mesh is really high in density. You can see if I zoom in here, and I can actually go into wireframe mode. Let me just go into wireframe. You can see here is all the vertices, and this is really dense. It's really dense. So this might be a little bit hard on your computer, especially if you go back into object mode and you're trying to like do different stuff in the scene. And also you may want to share your sculpt with someone, so you might want to send it to them. And if it's a really high dense mesh, then the memory of the Blender file is going to be a lot more. And you also might want to upload this to like a website like Sketchfab, like if you want to upload your 3D models so that other people can look at them. If it's really high dense, if it's too dense, then you're not going to be able to upload it, and it's just going to be harder to work with. So I'm going to show you how to make your mesh a lot less dense while still keeping the details. So let's go over here to the modifiers, and I am back in object mode. I can just hop over back to the layout now. So I'm going to go over to the modifiers, and I'm going to add modifier, and I'm going to add the decimate modifier. So this value right here, the ratio, if I turn this down, it's going to take away more and more of the mesh. So let's just change this to maybe like 0.2. So this is going to take away 80% of the mesh and only keep 20% of it. So it's going to, you know, calculate however it does it. It sometimes takes a little while to do, but now you can see if I move my mouse over and press, or move my pen over this and press Control A, that's going to apply it. And there we go. It took a moment to apply, but now it's applied. If I tab into edit mode now, you can see it's way less dense. This mesh is way less dense, but you didn't notice anything. When I added that in, you couldn't really see any difference. Let me just go back here so you can see it with it on. So if I press this button, it looks like a little computer monitor. This will make it so you can't see it in the view. So this is how it is before. Just take a look at it. And now I'll turn it on. And there it is with it on, and you really can't notice anything, but it's 80% less dense because we've made it only 0.2 instead of 1. And if you make this too small, like 0.01 or something, then it's going to actually start to destruct your mesh. You can see there now it's so low that it's starting to get kind of low poly. So definitely don't turn this too low, but like 0.2, that's going to take away a ton of the memory, but your mesh is still going to look the same. Now I did want to show you a common problem that could happen. Let's say you're trying to make a character, so maybe you're like adding a sphere, and then maybe you want to scale it up because maybe you want to make the head kind of round, so maybe you're going to scale it up, something like that. Then maybe you add a subsurf. Let me just turn that way up. And then I'll just apply that. And now let's go into sculpting. So now if I try to sculpt this, something looks off here. You can see that the circle is rounded. And if I try to sculpt, something is definitely wrong here. You can see it's kind of stretched out. The brush is really stretched out. It's like going way up. And you've probably figured out why this is happening. It's because I scaled the mesh. So for a while when I was first learning how to sculpt, I kept having this issue because I was like modeling an object like this, and then I would go into sculpt mode and the brushes were acting really weird and I didn't know why. So what I need to do to fix this is I need to apply the object scale. If I press the N key, you can see here's the location, rotation, and scale. And you can see the scale is totally scaled up, but these are all at 0. So what I can do is I can apply the scale. So what I do is I press Control A, that'll bring up this apply menu, and then you can choose location, rotation, or scale, or all transforms. I'm just going to click on scale, and now that I've applied that, I can go into sculpt mode, not edit mode, sculpt mode, and now if I sculpt it, it's going to look really nice. So I've talked over all kind of the basics of sculpting and also kind of the technical side of it, like the different brushes and things like that, and the different settings, but I also wanted to talk about the artistic side of sculpting, because even if you know all the brushes and know how to use all the settings, it still takes a lot of practice to get good at sculpting. And I have definitely come a long way. I'm going to put up on the screen over there some of my first sculpts when I started sculpting. I think I've been sculpting for about 3 years now, and I've been using Blender for a little over 4 years. But you can see right here up on the screen, some of these sculpts are really bad. And so if your sculpts are looking like this, don't feel bad. You can definitely improve, because this is how I started out. Just like drawing or painting or another artistic skill, sculpting takes a lot of work and practice to get good. Now here are my more recent sculpts, and you can see, I think we can all agree that these are definitely improved. I'm still practicing a lot and I'm trying to get better. I know that I still have a lot to learn, but I think I've definitely improved, as you can see from my first sculpts to like 3 years or so later. So if you're starting out and your sculpts are looking really bad, just know that that probably happens with pretty much everyone, and it just takes some time to learn how to sculpt. If you keep on practicing, you're gonna get better. But I do have a few tips for you that I think are important to know to get better at sculpting faster. So my first tip is to use a drawing tablet. Now I know I talked about this earlier, but I just want to say it again. I think it's really important. I think if you use a mouse, you're really limiting yourself. So even just buying a cheap pad tablet is going to be way better, like 100 times better than using a mouse. And my second tip is to move around and sculpt from lots of different angles, because you can see here on my first sculpts, I don't think I was doing that enough. I was kind of just sculpting from maybe the front, and you can see my faces especially looked very flat. And that was also just me really not understanding the forms and also not really knowing the anatomy of the face very well, but definitely moving around constantly, sometimes looking from the left, sometimes looking from the right, because you're not really drawing here, you're really working with 3D forms. So move around, look at lots of different angles to get your shapes right. My next tip is getting familiar with the object that you're sculpting. So for instance, if you want to sculpt heads or if you want to sculpt characters, then learning anatomy is really important. I mostly want to learn how to sculpt faces and heads, so I'm trying to get better at facial anatomy. I'm trying to learn that. I've been sculpting some skulls so I can kind of get the idea of the facial structure, like the bone structure. I also do sketching and drawing, and I think that definitely helps. And learning things like where the fat pads are and where the different muscles are can really help. So if you're trying to do characters or faces, learning anatomy is really helpful. If you're trying to sculpt other things like animals, like learning animal anatomy is really important. Really try to understand the form of the object that you're trying to sculpt. And that leads me to my next tip, which is using reference. I think most of the time you should always use reference, unless you're kind of doing some maybe challenge where you're going to try to challenge yourself and not use reference. But most of the time, I think you should use reference. Reference is super important. I use reference almost all the time for all of my artwork, because it's kind of hard for us to remember all the details in different things, like for instance, sculpting a head. I highly suggest using reference. I really think it's going to help you to sculpt better. There's also a program called PureRef, and I'll leave a link to PureRef in the video description. And PureRef is a really great reference photo program. So I have a multiple screen setup on my computer, and what I can do is I can open up the PureRef software, and then I can add in images, and I can move them and rotate them and scale them, and I can just kind of get a nice layout with a bunch of different images, and then I can just look at it while I'm sculpting or while I'm drawing or whatever I'm doing. So if you want to check out that program called PureRef, I'll leave a link in the video description. Okay, my next tip is to do sculpting tutorials. So there are a lot of free sculpting tutorials on YouTube. 2 YouTube channels which I'd highly recommend are Flip Normals and Digital Clay. So I know that there are a lot of YouTube channels out there that have sculpting videos, but these 2 YouTube channels are my 2 favorite. So Flip Normals and Digital Clay. I'll leave links in the video description to their channels. They have really good sculpting tutorials, and I can definitely recommend them. And also, don't shy away from watching tutorials that use other software. Like ZBrush is the main software that's used for sculpting, because once you know how to use your software, the artistic side of sculpting, it doesn't really matter what software you're using. So I definitely watch tutorials that use ZBrush or Blender or other programs. Once you know how to do sculpting in Blender, you could definitely watch ZBrush tutorials and take away the same things that they're trying to teach. So my next tip is getting feedback, and getting feedback is super important, especially getting feedback from artists who are more skilled than you. And there are some different places to get feedback online for free. I have heard about some Facebook groups, and I also have gotten some feedback on some Discord servers. So definitely look around, and I'm sure there's some different places online where you can get feedback. Also, if you know someone who's more skilled than you, you could definitely show them your work, and hopefully they'll be able to give you some feedback. I still have a lot to learn. I'm definitely still learning sculpting. If you want to get some feedback from me, you can leave a link to your artwork and ask for feedback. I'll try to give feedback if I can, but I'm definitely still learning sculpting. I am happy with some of the artwork that I've made, but I still have a lot to learn. And my last tip is to practice, practice, practice. So just keep on practicing, don't give up. I've probably sculpted hundreds of heads and I still have a lot to learn. I'm going to put a bunch of images up here to show you a bunch of different heads that I've sculpted, and this isn't even all of the heads that I've sculpted even more, just to show you that it does take a really long time, but if you keep on practicing, you are going to improve. And also there's this sculpting challenge that's really fun. It happens in January. If you haven't heard about it, it's called Sculpt January, and I'll leave the link to the website down below in the video description. So Sculpt January is a sculpting art challenge that happens in January, and there's a calendar where every day there's a word, and you're supposed to sculpt something that's related to that word. So after the month of January, you have 31 finished sculpts. So every day you sculpt one thing, and it really helps to just get in a ton of sculpting practice. I've actually done this for 3 years already. So I did it in January 2018, 2019, and also this year 2020. So it's really fun if you want to do it. Other artists are doing it too, which can kind of help to motivate you. And by the end of it, you'll get in a lot of sculpting practice. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. I hope that this video has helped you to get started with sculpting. If you'd like to support me and this channel, I do have a Blender Market store where I'm selling 3D models and assets and tutorials, and I also have a Patreon set up where you can get the 3D models and assets that I sell, and you can also get all the tutorial files on my Patreon. So if you'd like to support me, the links will be in the video description to my Patreon and my different stores where I'm selling these 3D models and assets and tutorials. But even just following me on YouTube and watching my videos are a really great way to help out, so thank you for your support. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another tutorial.